Welcome to Turn Extension, a supplemental podcast for the Advanced Maneuvers YouTube channel.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Turn Extension. My name is Tony, or Polar Bear Cub on the forums.
Hey everybody, it's Kevin.
Hey everybody, it's Devin Cutthroat Cure on the forums.
This is Gaston.
Alright, so for the topic tonight, Gaston, why don't you start us off with it?
So I wanted to talk about a little bit of some gaming stuff. And something happened to me a couple weeks ago where basically I went second, I advanced, and top of turn 2, I got obliterated. And I wanted to talk about how when that happens to you, because it inevitably happens to all of us, you can't play this game without it happening. How do you go back? How do you make adjustments without changing your list, where you say, this is something I did wrong, this is how you identify a mistake, and this is how you improve and change your gameplay and do your best to grow as a player? And I think one of the big things that kind of goes into that is I take pictures of all my games. And when you stop and you think and listen to things like podcasts, when you listen to or you talk on the forums, it's all very text-based, it's all very auditory-based. There's no visual image, and one of the things that these formats of communication limit you to is that they don't particularly describe positioning, where you're putting the models on the board in relationship to each other. We can all talk about, Malakar can go 38 inches and he's a weapon master and he's going to kill everything in the world. But if you don't have those models to sidestep off of, then he doesn't actually do that. Or if you arrange your models in such a way that he could sidestep off of and you could have prevented that, then you could have taken that back away from your opponent. And it's something that's very challenging to talk about in this format. But I figured it's something that we might be able to go ahead and tackle at least a little bit. So, using myself as an example, I was playing a Helga list into Epic Kruger. And what happened is I had a forest on my one side, I had a wall on the other side. So he won the roll, he went first, and he just brought everything forward. He was just, kaboom, straight up into my face. So when I was deploying, I had this idea of I wanted to use the wall as the anchor, so that way he can use his feet to push me back. So I had deployed with, Helga, so she would be behind the wall, then a few things on that side of the flank, and then a few things kind of almost avoiding the forest because I didn't have any Pathfinder in the army, particularly with my heavies. So when I came forward, I put Helga behind the wall, had a couple shield guards around her with the Valkyries, had a couple heavies all around. And he rolled up, he feeded, he managed to push her back 1 inch so she was no longer covered by the wall, but then she bumped into a model. And then he chose to push that model back and then all the shield guards back, so that way there's nothing within 3 inches of her, and then all the guns just kind of lit her up. So, it's very disheartening to have that happen. It's a lot more fun to be on the other side of that, where you're able to actually be the one, doing the assassination. I definitely like being that person. But, going into that, you take a step back, after the game is done, you say, okay, what could I have done differently? And you're like, okay, I got too focused on the wall. How could I have leveraged that forest? Because one of the issues he had is with telekinesis and the ability to go first. He had set up all of his threat ranges so that basically wherever I approached, I was in his threat range. So one of the things is I had Dalian Scarith in the list. I was using Dalian Scarith to go over the wall because they can gain Pathfinder and charge over the wall. And alternatively, I could have put them in the forest. They would have been stealth. They would have no longer been able to be targeted by any of his shooting. It would have been able to be targeted by any of his telekinesis. And then I could have also actually put Defender's Ward up onto Scarith, whereas I was afraid to put Defender's Ward out because he had all the wold weirds with Purgation. So I could have done that counterplay differently. I could have obviously positioned things better behind Helga. I never measured his feet, his threat range on his feet, on how far he would push me. So while I had tried to create lines of models behind Helga in order to keep that pushback, obviously I didn't do it perfectly enough in order for that to happen. I look at these pictures and I'm like, I'm coming at him straight on, which is where Kruger's strength is, whereas if you spread out more, then his feet covers less. So there's all these different ways that I could have approached this game, ways that I have gone into it with a different mindset that would have set me up for better success than I did going into that.
Well, I think one of the issues that you run into with pictures from a historical reference is you take the pictures and they are great for jogging your memory quickly of what happened last night or last week or something like that, but they have a very short shelf life before real life interferes with memory of the game. And I also think that one of the issues with pictures when it comes to recollection and trying to improve your game is you don't see the other side of the table from the pictures. I almost feel like if you're going to take pictures, maybe you want to take pictures of your side and then walk into your opponent's side and take a picture from that angle as well, because the game radically changes when you're on the other side of the table.
I mean, that's something I never even considered, is actually taking them from my opponent's side. I'm a selfish guy, so I always take them from my side.
It becomes, I mean, how many times has there been a situation where you come to the side of, it's almost like with the four sides of the table, there's four different ways of looking at the game and four different outcomes that you can't see because, at the angle that I was at, I didn't realize that this was open, or I didn't see this threat vector available to me. Because how many times have we watch machined on the side of the table and looked at it and gone, why isn't he doing this thing that's clear as day? I can see it right here. There's a charge lane right here. Why in the world isn't he seeing it? Because at your angle or your opponent's angle, neither one of you may even see it.
Now, how often are you taking these pictures, Gaston? Like, is it like in every round? Is it whenever there's a drastic change?
I do my best to take them at the end of every turn.
I can definitely see where Kevin's coming from with, wanting to get more of a, more views. Because if you're taking these pictures, you want to make sure that you get as much covered as possible. That way that because, if you're taking it from your side, there might be something that, maybe your opponent is viewing, as Kevin says, that, you're not able to from your vantage point.
I almost feel like the only true safe angle to take a picture at is straight down, to put it into a 2D world.
That's pretty hard to do, though.
Extremely hard to do.
And that's interesting because that's actually, like, when you're looking at streams and everything, that's the angle I hate the most, because I feel like I cannot recognize anything.
Yeah, but but that's from watching something. If you're playing something, do you think that you would have an easier time, like being able to designate what things are if you were looking at it from a top down?
Possibly, but I don't know, maybe I'm just old, but even Vassal confuses me.
I'm thinking of like when I'm watching football on TV or something like that. You got the sideline shots, and nowadays they've got the different line UIs where they show you where next down is and everything like that. But nothing changes the view more than some sort of drone shot overhead of the two teams. But I mean, it's one of the problems that I have with photo recollection is it's to the question of how do you improve without immediately knee-jerking to change your list. And let's be honest, I don't know of anybody on this cast or anybody even probably listening to this cast whose very first reaction isn't that core human instinct of, it's not me, there's something wrong with my list, I need to change my list. And that,
well, in your case, it's almost like there's something wrong with the faction. I need to change my faction.
Yes. I mean, we could even go up to the level of something wrong. It's not me. It's the game. I
guess I never change my lists because I don't have anything painted. So maybe.
There's the answer, Herman. You basically just need to strip all your models and play with only painted models.
Wait.
He basically does.
I feel like I'm getting trapped into that one.
I think that the first thing you have to do is the probably one of the harder ones, which is don't force yourself not to change. And you hear people talk about play 10 games with the list, play 20 games with the list, play 30 games with the list, and I honestly don't know what the magic number is, but there's a repetition that you need to just play the list out. And I think part of the problem with when you're trying to justify changing your list, it's a double-edged sword. It could be your list, but your sample size is usually too small. Most of us can only get in a game 2, 3, if we're lucky, a week.
Ooh, man, you're talking something foreign to me.
So I worry that to improve yourself, and you turn around and say, okay, I'm not going to change my list. I'm going to play with my list for the next 20 games. 20 games times 2, 10 weeks. So you're basically saying I'm going to play this list for the next 2 to 3 months.
So I think Leclerc from Seething Ginger, I think he has a pretty interesting standpoint. I'm pretty sure he guarantees that when he switches casters and he switches his list, that he plays that specific list, I think it's 10 times. He gets specifically 10 games. And only after he gets those 10 games does he change anything, because he believes that he knows enough about the list, enough about what he's working with to make, an educated decision. Do you believe that that's something like that? Seems like, I don't know if that's the magic number. I don't think there really is a magic number, but I believe maybe 10 is a good way to go. Okay, I've gotten 10 games in. You've probably done a pretty average sample size. You've probably not played every faction. You physically couldn't have, but you've, getting 10 games in, before you change something, kind of make sure that at least you have a little bit of that, like you actually know how the list is working for yourself, I believe.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like my number's like 2. Because if I waited 10 games, I just calculated, I think that's about 25% of my games for the year. So that's not just realistic for the amount that I play. But the reason why I get after like not changing lists and positioning is because if you go into a tournament, you're not changing your list. You're going to have to figure that out on the fly. And it's a lot better to have built up the mental flexibility to figure out where your strong matchups are, where your weak matchups are, and to play to your strengths, than it is to say, okay, well, if I had just had this magic model that's sitting in my bag over there that I'm not allowed to use, then I could have won.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you, after every game, do you have, I know we talked about this in an earlier cast, but after your game, do you take the time after it to sit down with your opponent and talk to them about what you could have changed?
It depends. Certainly in the game where I get blown out, I do.
Yeah, but I guess one of the problems you run into is so in Gaston's example prior, it sounded like it was a positioning issue. In a different game, it might be a time management issue. In a different game, it might be, how tired he is. In a different game, I mean, if you're, what are the parameters that quantify this is a bad, like I have reached a level of sample size, or reached a level of event to determine, yes, I need to make a change, and what is the Daldark way of things of doing, which is I just rolled trip ones, clearly my list is wrong.
I think if you're doing the...
Oh, go ahead, Tony.
I was saying, I think if you're doing the 10 games and every single time you have an excuse as to why I did this wrong, it's tired, it's this and that, I think at that point it might be a time for you maybe to look at something different with your list. Because at what point are you just making excuses?
If it comes to the point that you just aren't, I think if you're playing let's say you play 4 games. Let's say 4 games. You play 4 games with the same list. And so that's basically your average tournament, okay? You're playing 4 games with your list for your average tournament, and you hate it. I think it's time to switch your list, because I mean, whether you're a good gamer or whatever, I mean, it comes down to this is still a game, and a game is supposed to be enjoyable. And if you're not enjoying it, then that's an issue. You got to find that. So.
Anytime I lose a game, I try to break it down into kind of 3 categories. Whereas, was it dice, was it the list, or was it me? And it's usually like 5% it was the list. It does happen. There are bad list chickens. Usually it's about 5% the dice, unless it's, against Devin, then it's 50%. And then usually 90% of the time the problem and the loss is because of me. I had one where I was playing against Grimkin in a tournament. And it was a phenomenally good, phenomenally close game. And I ended up losing it on scenario. So I went back, And just going through, and this, was a close game, it was a tight game, but just going back through that game and through the battle report and through the pictures, I came up with 10 different things that I did wrong. And any one of those things could have possibly swung the game better.
So is it a situation of can you play reduced games? Does taking pictures allow you to play reduced games, because then you can try and sit back and go, all right, I have photos of this game. Let's play this game via the photos 4 or 5 more times. The problem I run into is that decisions in this game, from movement to placement to target prioritization, have massive butterfly effects throughout the rest of the game. One simple change completely rewrites the game.
Not to mention you take in the aspect that you add in the variable of terrain, and that adds anywhere from 8 to 9 different variables.
Well, I mean, I think the whole concept behind taking the pictures is that you're trying to build up a skill, and the skill that you're trying to build up is positioning. And it's one thing to just play the games where you're kind of running around, you're trying to place things where you think they're smart. And it's another thing to go back and retroactively look at where you place them, why you place them, and how you could have placed them better. So that way maybe the situations aren't apples to apples between the games, but by building up that recognition of where you've gone wrong in the past, you're able to then apply it in the future.
So how soon after these games do you refer to these pictures?
Usually a couple days. I had one where I was playing against Solus and his Grimkin, and I lost, and it was like 10 days before I looked at him, and I had no idea what we had done. So all I really know is I lost that game.
So is there merit behind looking at those photos for the sake of replaying the game and trying to make a decision? Or is it better to look at those photos and try and determine when did it go south?
I think it's both, really. Because the more self-recognition you can get out of them, the more you'll be able to apply that in the future.
I could see that.
When did it go south? When Tony moved his TEP out of the zone.
Hey
No,
man,
come
that's a
on.
good model.
No. You fucked that up. When did it go south? When Tony put his TEP on the table.
Well, what absolutely kills me is that as much as we bitch about the TEP, I think that is probably the best designed model to come out in Mark II.
Oh, it's that. I mean, I think the reason that we give it so much shit isn't because it's a bad model. It's because it's actually quite balanced. It has
The reason we give it so much shit is because we're jealous of it.
Yep, because it has everything. It has all the take and give. You take away a dice for this, but you give something to that. It's like Orion. I think one of the things about Orion that's super interesting to me, even though I completely despise the faction, is the fact that with Orion, you have to make decisions, It's not just, he's the best spellcaster. No, it's, if I do this, I get this, but I lose this, And I think that's something about the game. I think everything should be, if I do this, I lose this, but I gain this, And I think that's something...
It's even more than the give and take, because it's like this beautiful fusion of fluff and rules and good rules, where you're having, these servitors it produces every turn, and where they go to configures it properly, and then, they also take shots for it. It's just fucking genius. I hate it.
Yep.
I wish more of the game was like it.
I enjoy the model. I think it's good.
I
like the one that you had of where it had shoelaces.
That was a Warmachine weekend winner.
In the disco dance-off, or?
It was in conversions, I'm pretty sure.
So, I don't know. It's legitimately, I don't know if there's a good answer to your question, Gaston. Just because you can take pictures and you can self-analyze and you can try and determine where it went south. And you can do a lot of things to try and improve. But in the end, the two main flaws I see with the approach is you're never going to have a big enough sample size to give an accurate information. And the second one element or one factor of the game changes, it's a completely different game. The reason we have the statement irreversible game state is for the very fact of once the game state changes, it butterflies out. There's no way of reverting it back to its original spot.
Well, let me counter you with this. If you had maintained that same game state, you would have lost. Now you've made a decision that changes that game state into potentially something more favorable outcome.
But you can't sit there and turn around and go, okay, well in turn 2, if I'd moved this model here, then in turn 3 I'd be able to do this, which would lead to turn 4 to do this, because the second you move that model, you change that game state, your opponent's way of playing changes, your way of playing changes, and you're playing a completely different game.
Yeah,
No,
because you may not have moved, this model there because he would have, say you took the Valkyries and instead of taking them left, you took them right. Well, maybe he counteracts that by taking something else left instead of right. And now when you look at the pictures for turn 3, everything's different.
I almost feel like you have to look at the pictures with your opponent.
That would be awkward.
I think it would be, I definitely think it would be, I think there would be something interesting. As I said, we've had conversations about it before about, referencing and making sure that, after the game that you take the time to talk to your opponent and make sure everything's working out. I mean, what if what if there was more focus on after a game making sure that the two of you sat down and basically went over these pictures? I wonder if that's a good way that, more skilled and more competitive players might, do to get better.
Well, and the other thing is that's similar to what we do with the battle reports.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, if somebody's trying to improve their own skill set, that taking the time to write out a battle report or do a video battle report or something like that, by the mere fact of you reviewing your own game for narration purposes will immediately cause. I don't know how many times I've watched some of our battle reports when I'm doing the voiceovers, and I'm looking at the screen going, what the hell am I doing?
Yeah, when I was watching, when Fred and I played in our game, there was a point that both in real life and when I had to watch it, that I went, what the living fuck was I doing? It's funny.
So I think if you're trying to improve your gameplay and figure out different ways of how you could have done better, what you could have done without changing your list, that's an option available to you if you don't already do it. That's a hard one. Like I don't know if there's a way to answer your question. I don't know if there's a way to address it other than play more games, fool.
always. But
quality.
And that's the other thing is
quantity is a quality of its own.
Yeah, but
quantity is its own quality, but if you're crushing every opponent, like if you have a 100% win ratio, you're doing it wrong.
Or you're Jay Larson.
Even Jay Larson isn't 100%.
Yeah,
he seeks out the problem matchups.
Jake Van Meter, who's sitting around 100%.
Because when Jay Larson was getting into Grimkin, he was having problems with Ghost Fleet, so he kept playing Grimkin into Ghost Fleet, and trying out different ideas. And I think one of the ones he had was the Dreamer goes forward and uses her gun to RFP and drop a little, what do you call this, Daydream in place, and then someone else kills a Daydream, and then you kill another model in RFP, and so on and so forth. So that's how he was trying to RFP the leaders. But, I'm sure the losses mounted up for him while he was trying to figure out what strategy actually worked within his faction to that particular list.
And I've heard people talk about, seek out the hard matchups, and I know I'm going to use the term pro players do it. But to me, seeking out the intentional hard matchups to lose over and over again is synonymous with walking up to somebody and saying, hey, could you punch me in the dick over and over again, please?
Well, the idea is that eventually at some point you learn to cup.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, it's only if they're punching you in the dick while you're, like, jumping rope.
You assume too much of my ability to recognize a situation and correct for it.
You mean you just like being punched in the dick?
I mean, yeah, everybody's got hobbies. Don't judge.
That's an impressive hobby.
Even more impressive that he has 2 kids.
I don't know. I legitimately don't. I can't think of any answer to the situation other than just play more games.
Now, do you think that... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's play more games that you're self-aware, not just play more games. Like, to cycle back to something we were talking about before we started recording, is you and I had played that Midas versus Cognifed Siphon game. And you came in and you said in the battle report that you were expecting a melee army because I think of Battle Lust. And what I brought was a gun line that I would then Battle Lust. And so it had you completely off kilter just from the beginning of that game because you came in with a different expectation. How much different would that game have gone if you had come with an expectation that I was bringing a gun line instead of a melee-based army?
Oh yeah, I mean definitely you have to learn from your scenarios. It becomes one of those situations where if I see Midas and a bunch of gun bores, I'm immediately going to think gunline now, which could theoretically be my downfall because I'll run into it thinking it's a gun line and get battle lusted in the face. But it's that's just experience. That's just I got punched. All right, let's try and swing to the left this time.
Now, do you think that this is a scenario with what we're talking about? Do you think this is a scenario where you should, try to make sure that if you're trying to test this, that you're playing tournament games? Get some tournament games in there. That way that you're making sure that, that you're playing in a competitive format because while, you're looking for as close of a sample set as possible, usually in a tournament format, most people are actually trying to be competitive.
I mean, I have no problems using tournaments to test a list out.
Say that again?
I was just saying, I have no problems using a tournament to test a list out. I mean, I'll bring something that I've never played before to one. Just a local event to see what happens. The last time I did that was Caliban, and man, did I get my teeth kicked in. That's how I discovered that list cannot handle anything that's armor 18. And that is a really low bar to not be able to jump across. So, I mean, and part of it for me is I bring practice lists to tournaments and practice in tournaments because, hey, I get 3 games that day versus, game night where I'll probably only get 1 game.
Right. Yeah, that was my main reason I used to play in tournaments is because I got to play different people than I did usually, and I knew that I was going to get X amount of games in that day.
All I heard you just say right there is you don't like playing Kevin.
That's 100% what I said, actually. How did you know?
Good to know that you picked up what he was putting down.
So, Tony,
Yo.
as the person who plays probably less games than even I, how is it that, with you keeping in with the game, is it something that you feel like you try to keep a competitive edge, or does that just come naturally?
I just play for fun at this point. I just try to make lists that I enjoy. That's actually why currently I'm painting Orion, because I think he's going to be really exciting, and I think he's going to do enough to where he'll help me deal with more competitive lists, like dealing with a lot of Ghost Fleet, but also he'll be an interesting enough caster to keep me focused on Convergence.
Action?
Yep.
Well, I almost wonder if the factions like Convergence and Grimkin and soon-to-be Crucible Guard, if they're not a boon for not changing your list because the permutations of list change are so limited, especially when you throw a theme force on top of that as well. If you're the person like, I don't know, myself, would it actually be beneficial for you to be playing one of those factions because you can't change your list every week because sooner or later you're going to run into a situation where you change it back into a list you've already done before.
I think it is pretty helpful, actually. It keeps you focused. There's less casters. There's less choices of models. Really, the more interesting things you can do out of it is spam more. It's more so what combination is going to work better. It'll keep you more focused. The issue that you're going to have, Kevin, is that you just don't change a list. You change an entire faction every other week. And having a limited faction is not going to help with that at all. But I
What if he has?
still argue...
What if he has 3 limited factions?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I still argue to this day that if you played Convergence, you would really like the faction. I think it will scratch an itch that you have been looking for, that you thought Trolls were going to scratch. I truly think LeConte is really the caster you should be playing. And even Orion or Axis. I think those 3... 1, I think they're the 3 best casters in the faction, but 2, I think that is your play style. You just don't like them because of the way they look, and that's hurtful.
That's legitimately one of the reasons why I never went towards them.
I'm actually really surprised by that because I love the Art Deco.
I hate it.
No.
I hate it as well.
Yeah, I'm
Really?
with Kevin.
I cannot stand the way the only model I ever liked in the game was Axis. Like, I like Axis. I don't like any of the other models. I can't stand the way Orion looks. I think it looks stupid.
What about LeConte? LeConte's kind of cool looking.
I don't even like the way he looks. I don't like the thin spider.
See, it's funny because, like, to me, like, when I look at them, I can't help but think of that 1990s Batman cartoon where they had, like, Gotham was all Art Deco and you have those
that
edges.
wasn't a cartoon. That was Michael Keaton's. That was
No,
actually...
I'm talking about the Bruce Timm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
But like I look at the Convergence stuff and I can't help but be kind of reminded of my childhood. I'm sure Freud would have a field day with that. Like I love just the shapes and everything of the Warjacks and like the columns. That's just me.
Yeah, they have never once done it for me.
That being said, I still think you would like them.
Well, you're probably not wrong.
But I mean, I think personally, when it comes to Kevin, he is just as much about the hobby side of this as he is the gaming side. So if it's not an army that plays well for him, if it's visually unappealing, I don't think that it would do any better. That's the only sucky part. If they could just make a COC that looked a little bit better for him, then that would be a win.
I mean, isn't that everybody's argument? Anybody who's ever had an issue with the aesthetics of a faction would be like, I'd love to play this faction, but I want to completely change it.
I think
You're saying that you need some lipstick on that cock?
I think it's select few people that don't like the aesthetics. For instance, I hate the aesthetics, but I'll still play the damn faction if I enjoy it.
Yep.
And that kind of cycles back to something I wanted to poke you about was you're saying that you're playing for fun and that you're interested in Orion. But I know also you've been pretty hot on Aurora, correct?
I blame Aaron Allen for that, but yes.
But my question
Who's
is,
Aaron Allen?
Huh?
Who's Aaron Allen?
So Aaron Allen is one of the 5 Convergence players that went to WTC. He got knocked out round 3 against the person that I believe won Warmachine weekend. So before Orion came out, he was talking a lot about Aurora and how he's pretty much using her as an assassination, which I find really interesting because it was something that I never would have pictured with Aurora because I claim...
Really? Isn't she the Clockwork Angel bitch?
Yes.
Yeah.
See, that's the role that I feel like she would fall into just looking at her.
But not her herself being the assassination. Her delivering her units in a way to assassinate with her feet. Because her feet gives parry and reposition 5, which is great. And then she has a 3-focus spell that gives everyone plus 2 inches and flight. So the thought was she pops feet, casts that spell, and starts sending in two units of reciprocators to fly over your army, stab your caster. And then if they need a boost, she also has that transference spell, so she can pull focus off to boost it, and then they fly back. And the second unit goes in. If they haven't done the job, then they fly back. And then you have 2 more units of eradicators that fly in and then can stab as well.
Well, and the other thing that you might be able to do is have them charge something that's in front of the caster, then sidestep off and then reposition 5 and just surround the caster for next turn.
That's true, yeah.
She seems very non-linear. Like, she's going to come at you, and it's going to be from a direction you're not prepared for.
Her feat was significantly more non-linear in the past, but it was all really focused around her being able to kill things in the past. That was because she was able to, and that was a Mark II rule, so she was able to stab, reposition her distance, and then she was able to keep attacking. So it's definitely changed her style, but again, it's one of those things where that's going to be a cast order if you start playing her, you're going to lose a lot. And it's going to be getting around the original topic is, well, how are you going to keep playing it and pushing through that to see kind of what that list was. And it was impressive that Aaron was actually able to do that. That is widely accepted as the worst caster in Convergence. And the fact that he was able to take that, he probably lost a lot with it at first as he was tweaking this list. But then once it started working, he was talking about how terrified his meta was of that list because it was extremely hard for them to be able to defend against it. Because with
They
the
also don't
diffuse,
know what to do. I mean, you're talking about a caster that, as you said, admittedly was supposedly dog shit, and then you have somebody coming out of fucking left field and basically raping your butthole with it.
exactly. Because theoretically, on with a diffuser shot, you're looking at a reciprocator having a potential of 16 inches of threat, I believe. Because it's 5 inches plus 2 inches for the speed boost, plus 2 more inches. Oh, no, sorry, not 16 inches. Plus 2 more inches because of their reach. An additional 3, so it's 12 inches of threat. So,
But then, like you were talking about,
and then
reposition 5 after.
Yeah.
You can set her up for the following turn. And those guys are
14.
not easy to remove.
Exactly, yeah, they're not easy to move. Sorry, I meant 14 inches because it was 2 for the diffuser, 2 for the spell, and then 2 for the reach weapon. Yeah, and then them themselves are not easy to remove. And if you hit them, the whole unit gets vengeance because their weapon, because they're medium-based units. So all the models get vengeance. All medium-based models get vengeance. And there's Enigma Foundry, so you can bring them back as well.
So if you hit that unit, your 14 inches becomes 17 inches already.
Yep.
Jesus Christ.
For someone who's a fun player, that's not a fun list.
Hey, that was all Aaron Allen. I tweaked the list a little bit to stuff I found more interesting, but that was all that, man, right there.
Well, the reason why I was bringing up that you're interested in Aurora and you're interested in Orion versus like someone like LeConte is that it feels to me like they're also much more dynamic casters than like LeConte. He just kind of sits there and he feeds and he casts T-Cell and he positive charge, but he's just, he's kind of sitting there throwing out a candy bar here and there like it's Halloween. Versus Aurora, where you have a lot more movement, you have a lot more positioning, you have a lot more interesting interactions and counterplay. And like when I've been tallying up the casters that I like Arcadius over Carver because Arcadius has the feet and you have the movement again. And I think that was interesting that you were drawn to those two casters who present you option after option, turn by turn.
I mean, I think that's originally why I was honestly attracted to Axis even before all of that because of his movement shenanigans. The fact that he can bulldoze people out of the way, his feet gives plus his speed, he can countercharge. I think that was really good. Honestly, I think Aurora is something I've kind of fallen into, and it was mainly because, like I said, talking with Aaron Allen, that guy is he tends to push a lot of the meta, I think, in a really interesting and unique way. I was hoping the guy would have gotten further in Warmachine Weekend, but at least it's good to know that he lost to. I believe he lost to the guy who won all of Warmachine Weekend, so you can't be that pissed, if that's the guy you lose to.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going down, that's not a bad choice.
I think it's good, too, because I think between him and Want, I think you see just between those two casters, those two people, they played very different lists, and I think they tend to play very different lists, so it shows that even as a limited faction, there's still a wide variety of what you can really do with that faction.
I mean, that's going to be great for the COC community, just from a perspective of they can't, I won't say they can't, they are less likely to get locked into this is the only way to play COC when you have two champions going two completely different directions.
That's true. Now, the one constant remainder was the fact that both of them had LeConte. And I think it's because Signar is such a scary thing in the meta. I think LeConte is a really, really good standby. Just because the plus of the armor, everything gets shield guard, you get deflection. That's kind of one of the things where I think Convergence is going to be stuck at, is knocking Father out of the list is going to be pretty hard.
So ADRs that don't have LeConte COC will be skipping those 6 months?
I don't know. I do think this next round of ADR, I'd be really surprised if LeConte is in ADR again. But then again, they could just not play champions.
Yeah, that's usually been my solution.
Yeah. I mean, Because you got this last 6 months, most people who played Axis and Lucant, they weren't playing ADR anyways because Axis wasn't in it this last round. I don't think Lucant's going to be in the following round. I'd be really surprised.
Which is kind of frustrating if you stop and think about it. You're like, you're a limited faction, and they're going to purposely take your, I don't want to say power casters, but your strongest casters out of rotation.
Well, I think it's because they want to see variety, which is what I think ADR is.
I agree with Tony there, because if it's like if you it's like with a baby. If you pick up a baby and move that baby everywhere, they say that baby is going to be less inclined to walk, because why? And I think that, looking at the convergence community the same way, that if you, always give them something to basically fall on, they're just going to use it every time, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like variety is a luxury for factions with 15 casters.
I mean, it's definitely really nice having variety if you have, all those casters. But then again, I think those people get more upset because at least I know in my pairing, I'm at least going to have one really good caster in ADR. I feel like no matter what. I guess now there's a chance that I won't if they take Axis and Lucant out. But even so, then I'll still have at least Orion. So I'm always going to have at least one really strong caster because I'm limited. And I think having two of them in, it just really shuts the focus down even more. Because if I can get an additional 40 points of ADR, that's a complete game changer. I can take out, I can take out both my Teps if I wanted to, if I saw the list, or I can put two Teps in. I can do a lot with 40 points that is mind-boggling. With a limited faction of convergence, I think I have more options because there's so many more things I think I can change the list. To kind of, because I think our casters can do enough to kind of present a lot of problems, a lot of things. But with Orion, if I know I'm not dealing with, if I'm dealing with more stealth, I can put in more assimilators and take out one of my taps just so I can do that.
Something I do believe that the limited factions really benefit from, and this is me personally, I think they really benefit from the fact that, because you guys have so much less stuff in the factions, that you guys are able to figure out list variables so much faster, because you're taking out, you have so many less options. For example, you look at Signar, I mean, there's almost as many Haleys as there is casters in all of Convergence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and that's bonkers to think that, just if you look at just the Haleys of the game, you're almost in the same number. So that decision of making, which Haley do I play is basically the decision of what COC caster do you play in general. And I think that's really beneficial for for those limited factions, because then you can go, I think that's why these limited factions do so well, is because there's so fewer variables that you're able to figure out what's really good, and they usually have to work pretty well since they're so limited.
Yeah, for me, I think there's literally one unit in the game that I'm not excited about for Convergence, and one Warjack, and the Warjack's not even that bad. The modulator is not great. It's a light, and it's not light, but it doesn't do a whole lot of power. It's a lot electrical focused. I mean, Prime Complex as well, but other than that, it's just really the perforators, and I think even they gained a lot more ground with having a new caster. So there's a lot of options. I think even Grimkin is significantly more with that. So I agree with you. Yeah, there's definitely, I think you can taste the spice of life a lot more in a limited faction, which is not ironic, but it's a funny thing.
So does that go into you get more value out of your games played because you don't have to change your, going back to the whole changing of the list thing, you're getting more value, you're getting more exposure, you're getting more awareness of your faction because you're less likely to change?
I think so, yeah. I mean, like what Herman said, I copied off of what Herman had did in Mark II. I had an entire thread where I just posted about Convergence casters, a thing called the Convergence Archives. And what I did was I took pictures after every single turn. And then when I put it up there, I was writing about it, talking about this is, what I did and all that stuff. And for me, it was I liked it a lot because I could see like what Herman was saying is, hey, this is the stuff that I did wrong, and I think I could have changed that. And yeah, that would have had ripple effects down there. But at that time, I did not notice that point at that time. So the next time I played, I looked for those inconsistencies from my previous game and tried to correct them for the next game. Instead of just thinking, man, I had a crappy game. It's like, well, I had a crappy game. Let me take a look at what the board was at that state. And what did I think was my first mistake? And if I would have changed that, or let me make sure I know next time when I'm unpacking my army, this is how I need to unpack in a better way, because when I did this time, I put one of my models way too far back, or I didn't do this activation properly. I need to know that for next time. And for me, I don't think I would have seen that as quickly if I didn't take those photos. And then I also had people comment on them saying, hey, why didn't you try this instead? So it was good as a community because, a lot of us got to talk about it. And then I think it did help me progress a lot more because I did that, I think, 1 week, and then I played in a tournament, and I got third place in the tournament. And I had only had, I think you, Kevin, I think you had just finished painting a bunch of my models that I was playing during that game.
Well, and I think one of the other things is that those skills continue. Like, it's kind of like riding a bicycle where, maybe you need to dust it off. But I think we all kind of recognize you as a much better Convergence player than you are necessarily as a Signar player, despite Signar being kind of your love and Convergence being kind of your mistress.
I do love Signar a lot, but I suck at them.
But with the Convergence, you've been a lot more focused and a lot more consistent with them, and you've kept those lessons, and they didn't change with the edition change. So those things that you even were talking about that are 2 years old still matter now.
Which I agree with on that. Yeah, I mean, that is a good thing. As like I said, the best thing about Convergence is they really didn't change at all from the edition changes. A couple of rules changed, but the faction itself did not get an overhaul. So there was a lot of those techniques where I was able to continue on from Mark 2 and the Mark 3 to keep playing to do well. My thing with Convergence at the time was I was just really burned out playing the same two casters because I was stuck on LeConte and Axis, and I think Orion. My argument was always with limited faction is I think you could do a lot more with one caster, specifically with Convergence, than you could with a new unit. I think a new unit's interesting, but I think a new caster changes Convergence particular gameplay completely. It's because of how the vectors change.
Particularly one such as Orion who has, his abilities are diverse.
His abilities are insanely diverse, and it was funny because the first version of him coming out didn't even have that configuration ability. That was actually talked about in the dev talk, and that's how it popped up was, hey, let's add this configuration ability. And it changed a little bit where I think it made it more balanced.
So we can give that, so we can honestly award a point to CID.
Oh, definitely. I think CID vastly improved him. It took some things away, but it took the thing away to where with configuration he couldn't be a 7/7. Instead, the most he could be is a 7 or a 6, which is very balanced. I think it was very good. That was, I think, the only real thing that changed from him. But it was a solid change from configuration.
The thing that drove me a little bit batty with that is that's not including flare.
That's not including flare. No, nothing. Yeah, of course. So he could potentially get up to a rat 9 or a vector could be at a rat 11 if they're standing still.
But I also think he can reach down into the what are they called? The reductors, the spray guys, the spray single wound infantry.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've got that feat where you can either make them weapon masters on the charge, or you can make them very accurate with their guns.
Exactly, yeah. So if
or
you're going
even,
against
more damage with their guns too.
Yeah, and it was a cool thing because I don't think his feat ever changed at all, but it was an interesting thing with him. But again, it goes to that, like what you said, I think limited factions, the caster, I feel, changes significantly more than adding a new unit. I think when you get to the bigger factions, having a new unit is really cool because I do think there's a caster bloat in a lot of instances, but in limited factions, I think it's a lot more impactful when you get a caster because you only have so many you can choose from, so one is going to greatly change everything.
Well, I'm kind of curious if 6 is the sweet number since Grimkin has 6 and now Convergence has 6.
I think so. I think I was really surprised that Grimkin came out with 6. I'm really curious to see what happens with Crucible Guard.
I know Kevin is too.
As long as they don't all end up like that solo.
I was to say, Kevin, what were your thoughts on Prospero?
Little too COC on the nose for me.
I agree.
See, I didn't
That
feel
guy
it
was
was.
a lot of COC on the nose.
I don't feel it was at all COC. When
Really?
I saw it, I
The
held it in my
robot, the
hand.
robot man wasn't
Yep,
part of the robot army?
I did not think that Prospero felt anything like... That's like saying every Signar Jack is part of the robot army. Because they're robots. No, I didn't feel like it felt...
I feel like
It
that's-
was too thin, and I felt like it had...
Have you seen the casters?
Have
All
you
my
tried to
casters are
assemble them?
thin.
How many,
Honestly,
how many
I felt like
times
it did
Tony
look a
cussed
lot
out
like-
LeCont's arms?
It did look like a lot like I felt like it looked a lot like the Reductors. They're very thin, light base. I'm small base, but I mean we'll see. I'm hoping there's more of a change. I'm excited to see what their casters are. I still haven't read through Aftershock, so I don't know their full abilities.
Well, their casters look a lot like the Rocketeer.
That wasn't the caster. That is one of their units. The Rocketeers actually are a unit. The caster, the only one we've seen of the casters so far is the one that honestly to me looks like it's an epic Gorman, like Gorman goes caster.
That's true, yeah. Well, honestly, when I saw the Rocketeers, I thought those looked exactly like the Convergence Priests. Those look just like the
I meant
mask.
the Rocketeer from the Disney movie. I wasn't talking about.
Yeah, they're like a fin helmet away from being, full-blown 70s Rocketeer.
Can we just stop and take a moment to appreciate that The Rocketeer was the greatest Disney movie ever made?
I've never seen it.
Oh, you're breaking my heart.
I know.
Not sure I agree with you on that one, but okay.
How
That
can
was
you
a-
not love that movie?
That was such a good fucking movie. It had everything. It had Nazis. It had Zeppelins. It had...
Jennifer Connelly?
Never saw it.
Oh, man, Tony,
I-
you need to see it. It's good.
It's real good.
I was on the fence with the Rocketeers. I was excited with Epic Gorman. I was not excited with Prospero. Prospero. I think the cincher for me for Crucible Guard is really going to be seeing one of their jacks or whatever their battle group consists of.
That's because when you play Prospero against Convergence, you're going to get your models confused.
Maybe you can't paint them the same color.
I'm just worried there's some sort of rule that I won't see on the card that's like when playing a Convergence army, your opponent gets to control Prospero.
It'd be interesting if he was dual faction.
I'd be surprised. I feel like they're keeping things so limited in that it would be surprising if they kept anything dual faction.
You
Be too much balancing, I feel.
You're right. It would be real weird if they like took something and made it, in these limited factions and put it across two factions.
Like Gremlin Swarms?
Or 13 like Eilish Garrity.
Like Old Witch.
No, I guess, yeah, you're right. My bad.
No, it's not your bad. I'm trying to get you new models.
Well, we'll see the rules come April. I think April is when we'll see it. It's a few short months away, man.
Yeah.
Hey, so let's be honest, guys. We can't be too picky. I mean, look at what happened with Grimkin. We waited a fucking year.
That is true. And we're waiting a year for them.
So I'm going to get on my soapbox for a half second. We've gone from one extreme to the next, which is we had one extreme which was here's a whole bunch of stuff and a spoiler thing and go hunt the webs and you're constantly active and looking for it, and now we've got Tumbleweed Town where it's like, oh, there was something about Crucible Guard? I had no idea because we haven't seen anything for months.
Well, you were also super fatigued by the time the Grimkin spoilers became the CID.
Yeah, no, agreed. It was definitely an extreme where it was like, all right, I mean, we even said it on the cast. The Grimkin thing was released way too early for marketable shelf life. But Crucible Guard is going the opposite direction where it feels like they're holding too close to the shirt and they're not feeding. Privateer Press, here's a tip. One thing every month until release. Just one.
No, but let's be honest. I mean, we've kind of gotten that.
Yeah, I feel like we have gotten something every month.
Because we got Warmachine Weekend, we saw Caster. PAX, we saw a solo. Lock and Load, we heard about them. And there's been like little bits and bobs here. And let's be honest, there's more factions than just that. I mean, they do have to, I feel like the more and more that they push these new factions, a lot of the old time, followers are going to get pissed off because their faction, has been around and it's not getting any attention.
Well, it's almost like if they had this thing on their website where they could write articles, that they could do one article a month. But I don't know, there's probably a little too much work to have to write articles on the website.
Hang on, Captain Rose-Colored Glasses. Convergence was announced in February and released at Gen Con in August.
No, it was released at Lock and Load in June.
Convergence was announced in February and it was released at Lock and Load.
And I think that time Lock and Load was in June because I gave Andrew a lot of money to pick up a bunch of models for me there.
This was the first year that it was in July, so yes, it was June.
So what's worse? Not knowing about a faction, getting excited about it for a couple weeks, and then being able to buy it? Or knowing about a faction for an entire year and languishing the entire time?
I remember when I first heard about Convergence, I got so excited when I found they were coming out in June. And I was, because then you started seeing a lot of stuff coming out for them. They talked a lot about how they played, all their vector stuff like that. DC had hidden a couple things even within his posts. And it was only like a 3 or 4 month period until the models came out. And that was exciting to see the books come out. I think a year kind of sucks.
I think Tony's got it right.
Yep. I think for me, I would like to see a spoiler, a tidbit at Warmachine Weekend, and then have it hit at Lock and Load. That feels like an
even better. Warmachine Weekend is the first time you're ever exposed to it. You go dark until February, and then you get a full blown cinematic whatever majigger at what's not ClogCon.
It's not SmogCon either anymore.
It's not something.
They don't have anything. I don't think in February.
They're TempleCon whatever, and then you get it released in Lock and Load.
I wish that they would change.
They don't have anything in February anymore, and that's, I think, the issue.
Yeah, I wish that they would change Lock and Load to being an earlier in the year con. And the reason why I would like that, because I'd like to have something that officially kicks off that Privateer Press runs, or something like that. They had it in TempleCon. They don't have it anymore. TempleCon used to be their kickoff to their convention here. And they don't really have that.
They go to Las Vegas Open every February, and it's within the same coast as they're on, so their shipping and everything would be a lot easier.
Yeah, but it might be too expensive to get rooms and stuff like that.
And let's be honest, the Las Vegas Open is not a Warmachine and Hordes convention. It is very much a 40K Grand Prix, and it has a lot of growing before it ever gets to that point.
I think so. I think we will see. And this is my prediction. We're gonna see PAX Unplugged be more of a Warmachine event than the Las Vegas. It'll be a faster turnaround, I think.
I can see that.
And I think it's because for a major.
It doesn't have a background.
Huh?
The PAX Unplugged didn't have a background.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you're right.
Years and years and years of doing the same thing. The reason that it was created is very much like the Nova Open. As much as I would like to say that the Nova Open is a Warmachine and Hordes event, it's not. It is a 40K event that we've been lucky enough that we've worked real hard to get it to, share a decent amount of the coverage, where I think PAX Unplugged, it doesn't have anything. It's unknown. So being able to take something like that and add in, basically writing your own story there is going to be a lot easier.
All right, guys. I'm going to wrap this up. I want to thank everyone for listening to another episode of Turn Extension.
Have a good night.
Bye, guys.
Take care.